This exhibition we've compiled a large number, over 80 watercolours and drawings and works on paper, just to have a really good, strong look and concentration on Ricky's practice of drawing.
Yeah, the drawings is something, as you mentioned, a lot of people are more familiar with the sculpture work, but the base, I think even the sculptural work is based in drawing, although the kind of drawings I make aren't necessarily the kind of drawings that would typify a sculptor's drawings. Like, they're not graphic, they're more loosely painted, and they're perhaps closer to painting than a traditional understanding of drawing. But I studied at VCA in the drawing department, and during that time the painter John Catapan had just taken over that department, and whilst he opened up that department to encompass more practices, John's practice is also very much based in a kind of diaristic watercolours practice. So that had a big influence on me, like working with people like John, Jeffrey Ricardo, in the drawing department, and sort of where that activity of drawing was encouraged, and not necessarily the full spectrum of your practice, but just as a very natural element of your practice, and something that you could return to without the pressure of maybe making a major painting or a major sculpture. Like this idea that drawing is an activity, I wouldn't say a lazy activity, it's an activity of rest, almost for me, between bigger projects as well. Like, often if I complete a large sculpture or complete a show which involves a lot of sculptures, it's nice to have a kind of medium break and sit down and do the drawing. So the subject matter also has varied a lot over the last 15 years that the show covers, into various different themes or what I call blocks of drawings. And those blocks aren't so much like planned out and self-conscious, but they just happen. The way I choose to do drawings is normally for a period of a weekend, a week, or 2 weeks at a time. So it's not something I return to on a daily practice when I'm working on sculpture. It's very much a place I go back to, and there's a kind of concentration, and out of that kind of period comes a specific group or groups. So what we discussed earlier on, and what happens naturally if you look at the big image bank of the drawings, is that they start to separate out into these thematic groups. And I know that was one thing we want to do in the space, is use the segmented galleries to sort of plot people through those groups.
So can you talk us through a few of these groups, these series, these major blocks that you've been working on over the past 15 years that are particularly important to you in your practice?
Well, I guess some of the earliest drawings in the show, I wanted to show some of the sketchbooks from the last year at VCA, and the time I was talking about, where there was almost like this explosion of drawing, a lot of nocturnal drawing happening after hours at home. So there's those sketchbooks, and the early drawings are, I would say, have a more malleable subject matter, very loose and looser renderings, and that was at a time when I was influenced by both the subject matter of, say, natural history and also like science fiction. So the drawings kind of attempt to navigate this world in quite a playful and sometimes naive way, but through the kind of accumulation of a lot of those imagery and making those drawings, I think it's kind of like, for me now, when I look at all those drawings, I can see it's almost like developing my watercolor style. You know, like initially, like anyone, the drawings looked like a lot of art that I looked up to, and then I guess it took a while for me to find a rhythm within drawing that felt natural and like my own. So one thing that the early drawings do is kind of show you a lot of the avenues I went to before finding like a more, you know, it's not even a specific language, but a style, I guess. And out of those earlier VCA drawings, you can see some monkeys start to appear, and for the next few years out of art school. They came out of like this childhood fascination with Planet of the Apes, and this bizarre notion of like an upturned society or devolution. And I was also getting, like I said earlier, into the natural history references and reading Darwin and Stephen Hawking and things, and getting into this idea of evolution as a cyclical thing that could could backtrack or rewind. So the drawings map this kind of playful and sometimes sinister idea of a kind of that hierarchical exchange in society where like we kind of devolve or primates are reintroduced and we are the lesser species. So they kind of, I use this word a lot, they kind of map this more malleable idea of time in a way. And I guess they reference a lot of, well, like I said, Planet of the Apes, but also more playful references like of you know, monkeys being used in cinema and stuff. And I think the more you start to look at them, as the monkey drawings evolve, they start to look more like people, and there's this kind of slight ambiguity about who's in charge, I guess, that I think the drawings have.
You're 2 weeks into a 4-week residency here in Australia at Linnaeus at Byron Bay, Lennox Head, as you mentioned. Is this the longest period of time you've been able to spend solely on watercolours?
It is, yeah, and it's been really nice actually, because it's, like I said, it's a practice that I return to between pieces. There's something to be said for a conducive setting for drawing, you know, because I think it is, and even as objects, they're much more domestic objects than sculpture to me. They're much more like drawings or paintings are more part of the fabric of our lives. We're familiar with them, whereas a sculpture is this foreign object, and it's even quite a foreign object when you're making it. So a drawing feels like, I mean, I don't want to say it feels like phoning a friend, but there is like a more immediate dialogue, and portraits that are made from musicians, from record covers. The shots that I focused on to make the drawings are drawings that where, again, the subjects appear like very removed from the setting or disengaged somehow, like they sort of have a, I don't know, I guess it's the look of the musician to appear not interested in being photographed. But there's something about that sort of appealed to me, you know, triggered that group of drawings.
Your new work, which we had a look at yesterday, I noticed there's some Ned Kelly works there amongst the birds.
The Ned Kelly drawings I started making here was almost like returning from like a fictitious representation of Ned Kelly to these portraits taken from a kind of illustrated version of Ned Kelly's life. But the thing about a lot of the portraits of Ned Kelly and the Kelly gang that interested me was that they were also constructions. So they were constructions by journalists and media, because they didn't have that many photos of Ned Kelly, or they wanted him to look a certain way. So there's very few photographs of Ned Kelly and the Kelly gang that you could say are authentic. So I like this idea that there isn't really, you know, an authentic version of Ned Kelly. So even in my portraits, part of my attraction is that image, that sort of disengagement in the image, and the image of I think it's John or James Byrne, who was shot in the shootout with the Kelly gang. He's propped up for the photographers with rope, so he has a very interesting gravity, and I think his hair was cut and he was dressed in different clothes. So it's this idea of how do you construct an image, and whose image is it, and how does it live in history. So I think what drawing or painting has always done is kind of allowed people to renegotiate this idea of imagery itself, you know. So in general, for me, it's I think harder to talk about the drawings and what they're doing and what I'm trying to get at than the sculpture, because there's something like, no matter how figurative or resolved in images and what it references, there is still something like, you know, quasi-mysterious about the act of making a drawing. It's something very natural and like ancient that I feel like it's hard to sort of talk about it as an activity, whereas the sculptural work I do is more specific, and it has more specific boundaries. And I think what I like about the drawing practice, and what I hope is reflected in the show, is that there is more of this freedom, or it is just this amalgamation of different worlds and influences that I'm trying to negotiate. So part of what the practice is about is illustrating those negotiations through different subject matters. Like it's allowed to be more open-ended, I feel, you know. And I'm not sure if I would feel that way about it as a practice if it was the only thing I'm doing. If I decided that my shoulder joints could no longer take sculpture and I was strictly making drawings, I think the practice might change. You know, I don't know, I can't explain exactly why, but I think it would be a different practice. The
They're a
fact that
counter to one another, they're a balance.
Yeah, they do play off one another, and I mean, I think I have one drawing back to what's on my studio wall. It's a very loose pencil rendering of snakes negotiating a cycling helmet, and it's one of the few study drawings I've made for the sculpture, the arrangement, which was shown in Venice. So, and I almost keep it there because it's such an odd man out or an anomaly within my practice to make drawings before making sculptures. Like in the studio when I make a sculpture, there's a lot of physical drawing in space, like playing with an object, framing an object, like setting it up and trying to almost compose a still life to then make a sculpture from. Whereas with drawing, there's that kind of play happens on the page. It happens, you know, in real time, and it's recorded. It's there. So the drawing is a kind of, you know, record of that play.
Great. Thank you, Ricky, for talking with us this afternoon.